All rise. We will obey. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour Pénale International est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Thank you very much. Court officer, please call the case.
Thank you, Mr. President. Situation in the Republic of Kenya in the case of the prosecutor versus William Samoei Ruto and Joshua Arap Sang, ICC 01090111. And we're in open session, Your Honors.
Thank you very much. I see that appearances remain the same.
Appearances are the same. Good morning, Your Honors.
Except for the Victims' Counsel.
That's right, Mr. President. For victims, Austin Sig and James Mavia. Thank you.
Mr. Nderitu is no longer in court. Defense?
David Hooper, assisted this morning by Ms. Sullivan, Ms. Loy, and Ms. Jailaraj. Not Mr. Khan. He'll be arriving a bit later.
Your Honors, Mr. President, ours remain the same, Assistant.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia, you may proceed. That was the matter that Mr. Hooper was raising as we were rising yesterday, and that question also is ours from the bench. How long do we expect you to be with this witness in chief?
Your Honors, I'm estimating to finish by the end of the day today. I'm quite hopeful that I will. We're going basically through the different questions of the expert report. I don't think it should take much time. I'm concentrating on the most important elements from the report.
All right, please proceed.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Témoin.
Mr. Garcia, good morning, witness. The witness, good morning. Question. Sir, at the end of the day yesterday, I was asking you some questions about your expert report. And the bench also had a few questions for you regarding question number 3. Perhaps you might want to turn to that particular report and consult the relevant paragraph. Question number 3. I'd now like to ask you some questions about question number 5 of your report. And that had to do with the political affiliation of Mr. Ruto during the 2007 elections. And your answer was to the effect that he was affiliated to the ODM party. And yesterday as well, you made mention at page 45 of yesterday's transcript. Sir, it's not in your report. I'm quoting yesterday's transcript. But you said that the 2005 referendum was such that politicians, including Mr. Ruto and his team, began to enjoy a certain hegemony over the Kalenjin community. You also made mention of the fact that this was confirmed the following year when a statement was issued, and we didn't quite hear the word, but I think you were referring to the Eldama declaration. The witness, inaudible. Question, if you could please wait 5 seconds. This makes the task of the interpreter easier. Now, you were mentioning a declaration, the Eldamara Ravine Declaration. Could you tell us more about this declaration? Answer. Well, you see, it's difficult to define this exactly or to explain this ceremony. It was a ceremony that was perceived as a ceremony similar to one that was held in the 1950s that appointed Daniel Arap Moi as the spokesperson of the Kalenjin community of the day. And this statement or declaration was perceived similarly as passing on the mantle, so to speak. Daniel Arap Moi was relatively irritated by the ambition of William Ruto. And you must realize that during the ceremony, which was neo-traditional in nature, amongst the Kalenjin members of parliament present, at least one of Daniel Arap Moi's sons was present, you see. Question. Just so that we properly understand, when we make mention of the Eldama Ravine Declaration, you say that Mr. Ruto had been appointed spokesperson of the Kalenjin community by several subgroups within that community. You said that yesterday. Are we talking about two different things here? Could you please elaborate? Answer. During the ceremony, in actual fact, it was deemed that he represented the entire community, and I would remind you that that was challenged by some factions around Daniel Arap Moi, and also within Kanu, around Karabiwat, who thought that William Ruto did not represent the entire community, and that there was room for these other factions from Kanu. So these people were rather disappointed or disillusioned during the 2007 elections. All the same, they had a certain influence. Question. Witness, you mentioned that there was some disagreement on the part of Moi and other elements. Could you explain to us exactly why they were unhappy with what occurred at Eldama Ravine? Answer. I would interpret it as a form of personal rivalry when a young politician takes power. The outgoing teams, the previous teams, feel frustrated. That's just normal. One can't deny that the 2007 elections also represented a change, a generational change. A new generation of politicians were able to be elected from regions and sub-regions amongst the nebulous Kalenjins who took power. Certainly the older members of that community had a hard time dealing with this. It was a bitter pill to swallow for them. Question. You said that some leading members of the community were present. Who else was present at this neo-traditional ceremony? Answer. I don't remember exactly who was there. I don't remember the exact names, but I think there was at least 15 Kalenjin members of parliament and others. I'm quite sure that one of the Moi sons was present. I'm not sure which one, but it was somewhat of a surprise to see his name on the list when the newspapers gave an account of that ceremony. Question. Indeed, just so that we properly understand this concept of Kalenjin spokesperson, according to your research and study, do you have any information that would allow us to understand what this truly means, being appointed spokesperson? Answer. It was a relatively informal situation. And as part of the competition amongst different elements of the Kalenjin community, it was a way of one particular faction to move their pawns forward on the chessboard, so to speak. The identities, these identities are relatively labile and relatively reunified. Well, perhaps I could put it differently. Of course, the Kalenjin, like all other nationalist ethnic groups, have a homogeneous vote during each election. They vote in bloc at each election. Each time it's very difficult to reunify all these various communities. Their identities are quite fluid. There's quite a few divisions within the community. It's an incredible miracle, really. But there is this capacity to come together and to achieve unity, even within this rather varied group. The Kalenjin identity is relatively recent. First and foremost, it is a way of the entire community to come together. They must unify, and that way they can deal with the state in a consistent, coherent way. In particular, when it comes to the land tenure issue. That explains why the land ownership issue is an explanation for this identity.
You've used the expression witness a neo-traditional ceremony. Can you explain what you mean by neo-traditional ceremony? Why is it so? And what is it?
Answer. Neo-traditional in that there were elders present, as often is the case at such ceremonies. There were various traditional dances. You must realize since the 1990s, many cultural entrepreneurs have tried to give new life to the Kalenjin identity. For example, many historical programs to remind people of the major leading figures within the various Kalenjin communities. There's renewed interest in the dances and the initiation ceremonies. So you see, these old traditions are being given new life. But it's quite nebulous, really. There's this group of cultural entrepreneurs who are trying to give new life to the Kalenjin identity. And this is not the case only for the Kalenjin. The Kikuyu also have done the same sort of thing. They have been trying to renew their cultural identity through music and a whole series of publications, historical research, dance. The same thing can be said of the Luo. So this process of giving new life tradition, this appearance of these cultural entrepreneurs, for example, a number of museums have been established, and they have put on displays about local authority figures or major leaders develop their own. Well, allow me to explain. The graves of certain major leaders become display places. For example, I'll give you an example. Daniel Arap Moi has already established the museum where he will be buried. And in a way, this museum will be part of the cultural identity of the community.
Somewhere down the line, would you be asking the witness about this matter of kingship that we heard about? Do you have that question? If not, I can place it now.
Your Honor, the question does appear in different responses, but if the court feels that it can place it at this point, I think it would be opportune, maybe.
Okay. Witness, one of the reasons I asked you that question is because we've had evidence that what occurred was conferment of not all, at least one witness had spoken about what occurred haven't been effectively or really formally a conferment of a kingship on Mr. Ruto, and that hadn't happened for a long, long time. That the last king that the ethnic group knew was somebody else who...
We can ask actually
Yes.
the expert witness at Samoe. I think the witness knows, obviously, and he has commented on this
That
in his
is what
expert
I want
report.
to get at.
I can ask the questions in that
Please.
regard. Alors, Monsieur le témoin, vous avez...
Mr. Garcia, question. Sir, you made mention of the fact that Mr. Ruto was appointed spokesperson of the Kalenjin. Were there other spokespeople before him, other people who represented the Kalenjin community, informally or formally? Answer. Necessarily, Daniel Arap Moi was the central figure representing the Kalenjin. But I don't know, are you referring to the pre-colonial question? Indeed, if you're in a position to do so, and then I will follow up with other questions. Could you tell us about the first people who were deemed to be representatives of the Kalenjin community, be it formally or informally, from the beginning of the post-colonial period to up until to the year 2007. I believe you made mention of this in your report. Answer. The representatives of the Kalenjin community included Daniel Arap Moi. He was one of the leading figures. He was one of the people who really created this Kalenjin identity. Then after him, there was various ranks of people who represented the community. He was quite skillful in minimizing opposition within the ranks of his movement. He was very skillful in that regard, and to either put down or buy off people within the Kalenjin elites. Sometimes he even resorted to violence. We could look at the periods of violence in the 1990s, and we see that in some areas the violence was primarily within the Kalenjin community, within various parts of that community. Question, if we look at the post-colonial period, who were the traditional heroes representing the Kalenjin community during that time? Answer, I think you're making allusion to that well-known person who fought the British, and his name, and this person from early in the century who had been killed by the British, and this person was a prophet, so to speak, but not a royal figure, but rather a prophetic figure. This is a figure that is to be found amongst the Maasai. I'm not an anthropologist, and I'm not a specialist in this area, but this person was like a prophet within various communities who led and said that we had to wage war and that sort of thing. It's true that this person's memory was reactivated, or rather, the memory of this person was brought back. And on the basis of that, it is true that politicians did make use of this figure. Gabriel Lynch has explained this in his book on Kalenjin identity, that this historical figure was used by William Ruto. Question, and the name of this historical person or character? Answer, I no longer remember the exact name. Question, if you could glance at your report, perhaps that would be helpful.
Alors, c'était... Je me rappelle même plus.
Answer, I don't even remember anymore. I no longer recall where I mentioned that person. In any event, there's only one. That person is well known. Question, would it be Samwe? Now this historical person or figure that answer pre-colonial and at the time of the conquest by the British. Question, was he a representative of the Kalenjin community? Did he have a particular task or role? Answer, this is really not my area at all, but to my knowledge, this was a Nandi historical figure, because at the time the Kalenjin identity did not exist at all. It was a Nandi figure. Maxon, a historian, wrote the history of that conquest and the tension between the British and the Nandi. He was the academic who gave the best account of this particular figure. But this is really not my area at all. Question, that's fine. Witness, thanks for your answer all the same. You mentioned President Moi. Did he also bear a particular title? Was he also the spokesperson of the Kalenjin ethnic community? Answer, of course. There was the swearing-in ceremony in the 1950s, of which so much has been said. Moi was one of the founding fathers of this identity. I don't know whether we should even speak of identity, perhaps federation of groups. He was the main person, the leading figure. He represented the leaders of this federation. That could not be denied. Admittedly, if you consult Lynch, you will see that initially there was some competition amongst a number of figures, Serone, Moi, and so on and so forth. All the same, Daniel Moi quickly became the leading figure within this informal federation of communities. Question, to your knowledge and judging by what you said in your report, was he replaced as the main leading figure within the Kalenjin community? Did someone else replace him? Answer, yes. William Ruto was able to become the successor within the Kalenjin leadership. He was the one who became the primary figure. In such a fluid group, with such competition within the elite, for example, at the current time, he may very well be the vice president. And he was able to win the election. But there still is major tension within the Kalenjin community, and he does face major challenges. So it's an ongoing task, really. He needs to continually build on his leadership to continue to be the primary leader, the number one man in the community.
William Ruto,
David, it was Mr. William Ruto who took over when the leadership of the Kalenjin. When did this take place? Approximately. It would happen progressively. First of all, you had the referendum of 2005, and then you had this declaration of, well, after these elections in 2007, they were, decisive with regards to the situation, because on the camp of William Ruto, that camp won. They won all the Kalenjin seats, apart from 4 of them. So, and the 4 which weren't elected, well, not one of them, the 4 who weren't elected from that group. That is to say, they had no link with the patronage of Arap Moi. 2007 was the destruction at that time of all the positions, the representative positions in the parliament of Daniel Arap Moi. And that was an incredible shock, this election. to it's Gabrielle Lynch in her article, which explains this in detail.
Ça a été très inattendu.
It was very unexpected, it should be said. Daniel Arap Moi or Roy's Camp, they didn't expect something like that.
Et simplement, avant de...
Quite simply, before asking more questions with regards to this matter, you mentioned Gabrielle Lynch on several occasions. I would just like us to look at tab 7 in the documents before you. And then you can see in tab 7 you have an article, Gabrielle Lynch.
In the failure of dynamicism and the strength of the ODM wave in Kenya's Rift Valley province. C'est la page...
Tab 7. Is that the article that you're referring to?
Oui, c'est le
Indeed, yes, that is the best article with regard to the elections of 2007 from the point of view of the Rift Valley population. There are certain specialists in Kalenjin politics, Gabrielle Lynch, Javelin Clubs, Kameda.
Clean up that matter. I've looked at my notes now. Sorry to return to it. We can come. Witness, the name we were looking for would have been Koitalel Samoe. Is that it?
Koitali?
Yes, Koitalel Samoe. That would be the Kalenjin hero.
Samoe, oui.
Koitalel?
Oui, oui.
Is that it?
Yes.
Oui.
So that we have that on the record. We were, all of us, looking for that name. I just went back to my notes and found it. The question then is, are you saying he was not royalty during his time? He was not royalty to the Kalenjins?
To my knowledge, he wasn't a king. He was more of a prophet-type figure. He gave war directions, prophetic figure. Well, there are lots of them in Africa, in fact.
Fair enough. We just wanted to tie in what you said to the name, so we can continue. Please proceed.
I'm grateful, Your Honor.
Perhaps we need the spelling for that, for the transcript.
Koitalel was, I believe, at the time spelled Koitalel.
That's the spelling that I had, Your Honor, but if there is a correction, we can come back and make it after the break. Alors, simplement pour le fait du
Just quite simply for the purposes of the record, the article of Gabrielle Lynch can be found in tab 7, and the ERN is KN OTP 00460014.
Alors, simplement pour revenir ce que vous...
Simply to go back to what you said yesterday. Now, you spoke to us when you mentioned this statement, Eldama Ravine Declaration. You mentioned that it was made the spokesperson by the elders of many sub-communities. The elders. Can you tell us a bit more about these elders who were present? Who are these people?
Ces anciens, c'est des notables.
These elders, these are prominent persons. These are prominent figures. They're authority figures at local level. They play an important role in all rural communities in Kenya. Elders play an important role to the extent that, well, you have to manage law and order and the land ownership issues. And these authority figures at local level, it's often they who, in an informal way, carry out the management of all that. It's not the police in Kenya or the gendarmerie or the chiefs who do that. No, they ensure the security at local level. These authority figures, they regulate the situation when there's tension on all types of subjects. And this is particularly the case in different areas where land ownership is regulated. I mean, this is something we'll come back to, but they play a fundamental role when it comes to the land ownership issue.
Alors, Monsieur le témoin, simplement pour que
Yes. Now, just to finish the questions concerning Eldama Ravine Declaration, if we look at your report, and this is tab 1, and if we look at page 0883,
Question 6.
effectivement,
6. Indeed, question 6. Sorry, question 5.
Is the reference going to be just in the French, or are we going to get a reference in English as well? Because we're following it in English, except, of course, for the witness.
Mr. Garcia, that's a good point. You will need to indicate the reference in both places.
indeed, the reference in English is 00931321, and it's question 5. Alors, simplement pour que ça soit...
Quite simply, so it's clear, witness, in the answer to question 5, in the second paragraph, you can see at the start of 2006, he announced his intention to stand in presidential elections. Do you see this Eldama Ravine Declaration? And a few months later, he's crowned spokesperson of the Kalenjin by the elders. Are these events... They happened in a successive way. Is it the same event? Could you just give us a bit more information about this, if you're able to do so? Answer, well, I don't really remember the procedure. In Gabriel Lynch's book, that's detailed there. He explains how he wanted to be a candidate in the presidential election. And he goes into the... But with regards to the exact timing or timetable, I can't give you a clear answer in that regard, I'm afraid.
D'accord, merci.
Prosecutor, very well. You also mentioned, with regards to question 5, William Ruto. Well, he was made a spokesperson, and you also mentioned what happened to ODM Kenya at the time. Are you able to give us more information in that regard?
Alors, la saga ODM...
Well, ODM Kenya, what has to be said is that before ODM, you had ODM in Kenya. So if I remember well, it was from June 2006 that the no camp in the referendum to the opposition and, well, they tried to launch an electoral campaign through a partisan structure which was ODM Kenya, and it was a party which was functioning well, but it was marked by tensions between the elite. You have to know that at the time you had surveys which said that they were in a good position, and so there were tensions between the different leaders of that party to see who was going to be the representative in the presidential elections for that party. So that realistically was, do we organise primaries or not? And in June 2007, if my memory serves me well, the Council of Elders said that Kalamonzo had to be appointed as the candidate of the party without going through the meeting of the delegates in the primaries. Now, Raila Odinga said no, and he left, and immediately ODM Kenya found themselves within the framework, well, to the extent that all the leaders of the party, they joined Raila Odinga within ODM, and ODM Kenya therefore became a mono-ethnic party without any chance of having a strong influence during the elections. And it was from August 2007 that ODM was set up, and ODM therefore from there very quickly it appeared as a party which worked really well with a brilliant electoral campaign, even if they had a few resources compared with PNU.
point, Mr. Garcia. This theme appears in your response to the question number 5 in your report. You've also testified to it in various ways. Talking about the emergence of Mr. Ruto as a Kalenjin leader as compared to Mr. Moy, whom you had, I believe, at some point in your report described as an undisputed Kalenjin leader for a very long time. In your testimony, you've talked about shift to the younger generation, generational shift, more or less. And you've also talked about elders playing an important role in the community. Can you explain, can we reconcile this? Is it only a matter of generation shift, moving over to a younger man, or is there more to it that might have accounted for the shift of loyalty, if there was a shift of loyalty from Mr. Moy to Mr. Ruto?
Ce changement de leadership, with regard to the change of leadership at the leadership of the Kalenjin, this does of course correspond with a generational notion. This is a team of persons who are elders, and they are replaced bit by bit. You have to also know that Kenya is a political system which was a gerontocracy for a long time, and right until recently the leaders of the country were still the people who had participated in the first constitution for independence, and therefore the participation of the elders in this political system, well, they were always present, but it was quite limited by informal mechanisms. And you have to say that here we are in an area where the pre-colonial system was a generational system. That is to say that the generation has a social political value which is very important in this part of Eastern Africa. And there are lots of mechanisms, competitional mechanisms. It's very structured, and they still persist. Now, after the passage of the Kalenjin elite, now this also corresponds with the taking of power. Well, I wanted to say with the majority, the numerical majority. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's a sub-community who are numerically more important, the Nande and the Kipsigist, who until that point felt relatively marginalized, who managed progressively to impose their leadership, and therefore they managed to make the number of the population prevail, that principle. Now, there's a lot of frustration with the elite until that point because of the fact that there was a hegemony of Camp Moi which corresponded rather with a little subgroup, a little Kalenjin subgroup. And so you also have to know that William Ruto, well, all his political career, it's all marked by his wish to develop the representation of the Nandi in the Kalenjin system, but at the same time he's a political leader which has been sufficiently able to never leave the Kanu partisan area. So there's this competition with Moi, but without completely leaving the partisan system which helped him progress. So this is somebody who had a great ability in his strategy to becoming the regional big man.
On est sur une...
I don't know if I'm managed to explain the complexity of the whole logic here, but essentially it's Gabriel Lynch who developed all these different areas.
Alors, Monsieur le témoin, simplement...
Mr. Witness, just to go back to this last question, what I note is that you mentioned leadership from a political point of view and cultural leadership as well within the community. Could you explain if there's a relationship between the two in these matters in Kenya, particularly with regards to the Kalenjin?
Oui, bien sûr, c'est...
Answer, yes, of course. Yes, there is a historian, a British historian called John Lonsdale, who explains the difference that there is. He explains that there is, in all different areas, well, that is to say, within a group there is a series of principles that are stressed to say what the rights and duties are of the leaders, of the people, and exactly this moral aspect is meant to guide the leaders, and that is principally expressed by these cultural entrepreneurs. And they are meant to be the spokesperson of the population. They are meant to explain what the principles are, the moral principles that guide good relations between people within a group, and with these leaders included. These leaders are always included. They only exist through the group. So, if we speak about the case of Mr. William Ruto, what can you tell us with regards to his leadership from a political perspective and from a cultural perspective with regards to the Kalenjin community at the time, and in particular the elections of 2008? Answer, this is somebody who was
here. And that is that we're not concerned with the acts and conduct of any one accused, nor of any of the network. That's a clear declaration by the judges. And we're here really talking about background material. That's particularly important to bear in mind, bearing in mind that our expert witness has frankly declared that in this area he's relying on someone else's opinions and not on his own, because he hasn't done the work, the research, etc., that someone like Gabrielle Lynch has done. She's not our expert here today, and there's a danger that one brings her into the court, and of course I'm not in a position to cross-examine her. But the main point I make is this, that there must be a line drawn as to the acts and conduct of accused, and the ability, both under the jurisprudence and also under the court's order and direction, as to the extent to which the acts and conduct of any accused or any member of the network can be discussed in this forum.
Mr. Hooper, indeed, the Chamber's order has fenced out an area of inquiry that is proper and is improper. Now, are you concerned that the question posed will necessarily provoke answers that go to acts and conduct, or are you simply saying, be careful?
I'm saying be careful, and I'm saying in particular be careful, because the whole object of an expert's report is to, of course, put the court, and in particular the defence, on notice. And if we start meandering, and with respect to my friend we have been, there's a danger that open questions and open answers take us out of the context here of the report.
Mr. Gessia, I did actually think about, not precisely in those terms, but when you lodged that question, I was wondering whether it could not have been more specific. in the direction you want it to be?
Yes, I can, Your Honor, make it more specific, but just in response to what Mr. Hooper stated, this is not meandering. It's strictly on point to relevant issues, and I think the Chamber's preliminary decision on this matter was that the witness being an expert could touch upon social and political background so long as it didn't touch upon the acts and conduct of the accused, which the witness is not doing.
I didn't say you were meandering. Not that question has no reason for the court to determine. The point was whether your last question could not have been more or less more closed than it was.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll reformulate for the witness.
Witness, quite simply with regards to this last question that I put, I'm going to reformulate it now. You spoke about leadership, political leadership, cultural leadership as well within the community. Could you explain to us in a more specific way with regard to Mr. William Ruto at the time, just before the elections, without speaking about his conduct or behaviour or anything in detail, if there's a link between the two? Answer. Well, when the cultural inclusion and the change of leadership within this community, they go together in terms of the renewal. There is a work of recomposition of the vision of their history, the principles which should guide their politics, but at the same time there is a whole series of structures, associative structures, which try to help young people find scholarships, to help companies in the urban area. You have to know that the Kalenjin, they were behind, if you like, when it came to using the urban economy compared to other populations. So there's a whole series of things that are done. For example, helping political leaders who try to explain to young people that in the informal sector, that the Kalenjin have to be able to take advantage of the employment opportunities that there are in the informal sector. There are a whole series of initiatives that are, at the same time, they're political, cultural, social, economical, and all of these go together to try to revitalize this community during a period which is in political crisis, given the fact that they have lost power.
Également, Monsieur le Témoin, vous nous
also, witness, you spoke to us, well, you used the term cultural entrepreneur. Could you explain more about what this term means?
C'est vrai que c'est des jargons que...
It's true that this is jargon that we use so often that we don't reflect any more about what it means, but there you have a whole series of actors, of different actors, who could be, well, associations, they could be religious movements, they could be professional groups. They participate in renewal, renovation of an identity. Social organization is a very general concept which makes it possible to put together, within the same bag, if you like, very disparate actors who all participate in revitalizing an identity in different ways.
Alors, je vais revenir, monsieur.
So I'll go back to the question that I put to you before we went into this issue now. And when we were looking at question 5, you talked about ODM Kenya. And I also understood with regards to this question that you were addressing the issue of Mr. William Ruto and his post, his functions within KANU at the time. Could you tell us a bit more with regards to that issue? Answer. Now, if I remember well, in the 2000s, William Ruto within KANU, well, first of all, in 2002, He was the leader of the, he was responsible for the Uhuru Kenyatta's campaign, and then he tried to control the KANU apparatus, which at the time was very divided between the Biwott faction and other factions as well. And during the elections, the delegates met in 2005, if I am right, and Uhuru Kenyatta was widely appointed president or leader of KANU, and he was appointed Secretary General. No, I no longer remember. Well, he was on the... He was alongside Uhuru Kenyatta in KANU.
Alors, Monsieur Maupe, vous êtes toujours en mesure.
So you're still able to consult your report. If you like, if you look at 0883, you mentioned that William Ruto was the Secretary General of the party. 0883, and so 00931331. I presume that the information you've written there is right. Yes, I think that it's right, but I'll have to have a look.
D'accord, mais la position de...
Very well, but the position of Secretary General of the party, was this position important within KANU? Answer, yes, his post made it possible to organise a whole series of events, a whole series of elections, and all the rest. Yes, it's a post which is vital, absolutely.
Et si je comprends bien,
But, prosecutor, witness, but it would seem that from 2005, that subtly, then he will invest more in the new structure which appears ODM Kenya and ODM.
Il faut savoir qu'à l'époque,
You have to know that at the time of ODM Kenya, William Ruto was close to Kalonzo Musyoka, and he got closer to Raila Odinga later. So we're very much at the heart of the procedure with ODM Kenya.
alors vous mentionnez qu'il faisait
So
partie...
you mentioned that he was part of KANU, the post of Secretary General. Did he stay in that political party, KANU, afterwards?
est-ce qu'il a, si la question...
Answer, if the question, did he officially leave the party? I don't know. Did he have a fluid position with a foot outside, foot inside? Well, to the best of my knowledge, it's rather that the case, but I haven't seen a newspaper article saying that he left the structure. Perhaps that's something I missed. I read the book on political parties in Kenya, the latest work that's come out, and there was no allusion there.
Alors, Monsieur le témoin, j'aimerais...
Question, witness. I'd like to move on to another question that was put to you. Question number 7, and this is page 00930886, English version 0394, and the question was as follows: whether the ODM had the support of certain segments within the Kenyan electorate, and in particular from any segments of the Rift Valley electorate. Now, could you explain to us whether the ODM did have support from some segments of the community in the Rift Valley? Answer: in the Rift Valley, yes, quite clearly. In the Rift Valley, most of the groups followed the ODM, Kalenjin, Madakwet, Turkana. Question, sorry to interrupt. You mentioned Answer, Kalenjin. overlapping speakers. Kamatutsa. They follow the ODM after the support in the Rift Valley of social categories. We really don't know. And then the PNU, but globally speaking, we do know most of the community leaders did follow the ODM in the Rift Valley, and those who did not follow were subject to quite a bit of pressure, and after the voting, they saw their farms burnt down and that sort of thing. Thus, some business leaders followed, some churches followed, not all. In particular, apparently, there was a rather circumspect attitude amongst the Catholics, the Nandis. As for other groups in society, the various associations seem to have followed. So all in all, there was a relative amount of unanimity within the Kalenjin part of the community. Social groups, support, and so on and so forth.
Prosecutor, we need to correct the record. The reference in the English, to the English version of the report you mentioned should be 00931324.
That's correct, Your Honor. I'm grateful. And also one correction, une correction également.
Mr. Garcia, page 24. It's Kamatusa, Kamatusa. If I understand inaudible.
Turkana, page 26, ligne 22.
Page 26. The interpreter's sorry, but Mr. Garcia is not speaking into his microphone.
Mr. Garcia, the interpreters say they did not hear you. You didn't speak into your microphone.
I'm sorry. Je suis désolé. Alors,
Turkana, page 26, line 22.
également, lors de cette...
Mr. Garcia, question. Question 7. Sir, you also summarized the political career of Mr. William Ruto. This is page 0887 in the French version. And in the English version, pages 1324, 1325, and 1326 in the English version. Now, could you briefly tell us, according to the research that you've done, how did Mr. Ruto begin his political career in Kenya? Answer: he began his career early in the 1990s. He was close to Julian Chachabo when he was a student, and he really began his career in 1992 during those elections, and he became a relatively important member of a youth group, a lobby group that was trying to organize young people for the elections. Money was distributed to buy votes. At times, these young people were hired to police the large rallies. So he began his career at this very center of political electioneering techniques. He always was excellent when it came to the technical aspects of running a campaign. In addition to his charisma, he also was quite a good speaker. So he was very good when it came to the actual nuts and bolts of running a campaign. He showed himself to be independent. He was allied with a number of Nandi leaders who were challenging the power of Moi regarding certain redistributions and the treatment of certain farms and so on and so forth. But he did not leave Kanu. In 2002, as I said earlier, he became the boss of the Kenyatta campaign, and then he continued his career. He went merrily along within the KANU party until he took on that leading role during the 2005 referendum. Question, just so that we understand, sir, when you mentioned Youth for KANU, if I understood you properly, this was a group that was working for the overlapping speakers. The witness. At the time, the leader of KANU was Daniel Arap Moi, and Daniel Arap Moi, you must realize that KANU was a party that really hadn't developed much during the time of the first president. On the contrary, Daniel Arap Moi restructured KANU, and this was in the 1980s. And at the time of the multi-party system, you see, it was the only party that really had a proper mechanism or apparatus that was able to penetrate into one particular area. It was a real electoral machine, and the only party with true institutions. Youth for KANU was the organization that controlled quite a bit of money that was spent during the election campaign. Question. You also mentioned in your report that Mr. Ruto was the one leading the campaign for leadership, and you said Ruto was one of the main Kalenjin leaders within KANU. Could you explain in greater detail how that occurred? Answer. In the 2000s, question, yes. You said that Ruto imposed himself as one of the KANU's main Kalenjin leaders. Answer, yes. Because he chose the KANU camp, and this was against Biwott, it appeared that, I believe, he had 3 times more votes than Biwott during that election. And this was the result of the work, the lobbying by William Ruto. That's why they got those results. KANU was a relatively, well, it did not have a lot of influence on the Kikuyu. So appointed as the leader of the Kaku, he had to be able to get votes from the Kalenjin delegates, and all that work was done by William Ruto. He was, and the young people within his team. That is to be found in Lynch's book.
Yes, I think perhaps a little bit got lost in translation there. And in particular, who was the beneficiary of Ruto's efforts? I don't think the name appears. We've got, he had to be able to get votes from the Kalenjin delegates, but we don't know of whom.
Celui qui a bénéficié.
Answer. He who benefited from the efforts by Ruto apparently was Uhuru Kenyatta, because against Nicolas Biwott.
Durant la quête
during the entire that election at the head of KANU.
What election are we talking about now?
On parle.
The witness. The election for leadership of KANU, the leadership race. In 2003, you see,
and I asked that, I had in mind to also ask you this question. You had testified that Mr. Ruto was excellent at running campaigns, and you said that in 2002 he managed the campaign of Kanu's presidential candidate, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta. And in the report you say that, but Mr. Kenyatta was roundly beaten. Can you explain? Especially...
Oui, c'est vrai qu'en 2002...
The witness, yes, it's true that in 2002, Moi Kibaki won the election with more than 61% of the votes. So yes, he was badly beaten at that time. All the same, you have to realize that that was just one election in which William Ruto, in which he worked as an election organizer. Admittedly, he has lost some elections, relatively few. He was able to be re-elected in 2002, really just by a bare margin. And if you look at the analysis that was done of his election in 2002, we see that he was extremely skillful, and he was able to get re-elected as a member of Parliament, even though the situation was extremely complex for him. Thus, it is true, he does have the reputation of being an electoral beast, so to speak, someone who is extremely good to get the vote out, to get people. He's someone who knows how to run an election campaign.
How in 2002 did Mr. Kenyatta perform amongst the electorates in the Kalenjin region? Has that analysis been done, or are you able to let us know?
Answer. In 2002, during that election in the Rift Valley, I no longer have the district-by-district results in mind. I'd have to look at the books, but I think he was able to get relatively, it was one of the few places where he was able to get votes. It was an extremely tough campaign for him because all the movers and shakers within the party had left the ship and joined Mbaki. So there was no longer the support from those people, and he campaigned poorly at that time.
Well, you mean joined he joined Mbaki?
Uhuru Kenyatta.
The witness.
I'm trying to get the record right. You are reported as saying, quote, it was an extremely tough campaign for him because all the movers and shakers within the party had left the ship and joined Mbaki. Is that what you mean?
Kibaki.
Kibaki. Thank you. That's all.
And again, just for clarity, it was a tough campaign for whom? Because that...
The context was for Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yes,
that was the context
yes.
of that. Is that correct? The witness is nodding.
Alors, Monsieur le témoin, je vous ramène.
Mr. Garcia, question. If we could go back to question 7 once again, page 0887 in French. 1326 in the English version, you made reference that the outcome of the election, you said that it was the result of a profound reconfiguration of Kalenjin identity, and this was something that was not just improvised in 2007. Could you tell us more about this reconfiguration and the result on the 2007 answer? As I was saying earlier, there was a great deal of work to be done by these cultural entrepreneurs who tried to breathe fresh life into this identity by operations in the social sphere, but training young people, helping them find work. And then at the cultural level, radio stations also played an important role to give a stronger cultural identity, remind people of their history. And you see, there were various social categories were very dynamic in this regard. And this movement was created to give value to this identity and to forget the tensions within this cultural identity by stressing the fact that this is a very old identity. And this was also a way to unify the people and have them forget that there were class tensions, major class tensions within the community. And this was particularly a sensitive issue when it came to land ownership. This area, you see, in this area, the vast majority has no land, and then there is land that's not even being farmed. Often this land belongs to Kalenjin, and it's just used as collateral for bank loans. Necessarily, there is the potential for divisions, for tension within different religious groups as well within the Kalenjin group. For example, the Catholic community has also been somewhat separate. So this cultural dynamism has made it possible to forget these separations and to reunify these populations. And of course, this is very useful when the election comes along. So this is part of the ongoing miracle. At each election, these major groups manage to effect this miracle and unify people, and people vote en bloc for the same particular person. Question. On this same topic, when you mention reconfiguration of the identity and the nationalism of the Kalenjin community, how did the Kalenjin perceive the land problem in relation to other ethnic groups? Was that part of the reconfiguration of identity, this re-victimization? Answer, yes, of course, this was at the very heart of their identity. Let's speak a bit more about the land ownership issue. The Kalenjin identity was forged to try to regain control over land, and the Kalenjin identity was also forged on this feeling of historical injustice. The fact that they were set aside, neglected, dismissed. This is a community that had a president of the Republic, and this was from 1968 to 2002, so you would expect that there would be redistribution that would benefit that community, except that no. There was this very deep feeling within the Kalenjin community that no, they always have been neglected, in particular when it came to land. And even the regime of Daniel Arap did not do what they were supposed to do, particularly in 1990 to 2002. This theme came out quite strongly, and Lynch pointed this out. So people felt victimized, and people said we need to unite ourselves to leave this victimization behind. So yes, at the very heart, there was this, at the very heart of this feeling of neglect was the land tenure issue.
Et lorsque vous parlez de
Question. When you talk about victimization, which group are you talking about? Which person? You say that the Kalenjins saw themselves as victims when it came to land tenure. Answer. Well, when it came to land tenure in relation to the Nandi and the Kipsigis, who think that they were treated very unfairly. But in actual fact, the other groups as well do experience the same sort of problem in their own way. Question, but when it comes to victimization, you're saying that the identity, or this renewed Kalenjin identity, included a certain victimization when it came to land. Was there one ethnic group that was seen as the perpetrators of this injustice in form of, in relation to land tenure? Answer, yes, of course, the Kikuyu were at the very heart of this account of land being badly redistributed. So the so-called Kikuyu colonialization of the Rift Valley, that this was rhetoric that was developed in the 60s and the 1970s and was taken up once again in the late 1990s by the Nandi and also in the 2000s under the regime of Kibaki. All the same, the other population groups benefited from the settlement schemes, the Lua, the Luo. They too were subject to serious violence in 2008. They too were victims of violence. Question, in your report, sir, you make reference at page 0887. It's the same page, actually.
00931325, vous faites mention du fait que c'est
page 1325 in English. According to Lynch, apparently William Ruto was the person who orchestrated this. Could you give us more information about your affirmation? Answer, well, when you look in greater detail at his writings, it's not explained exactly how he became the leader of this process, of this dynamic, but this is based on interviews. She often interviewed William Ruto. This is a person who has always been very available to researchers, and he actually fascinates people who do research into Kalenjin politics. At one point in the year 2000, you should also read Jacqueline Klopp, Lynch, and others. She deduces more about his leadership, but does not clearly explain how this person was playing a central role in so many different processes.
That's the lawyer and us. We're not going to read somebody else's. The reason why we brought you in is for you to tell us these things in a simple manner. So, to the extent you can, let us know what your research expertise tells us. The reason why it's important is it's not a matter of little detail. I don't want you to get the impression that when you say go and read something, we will go and read it. It defeats the purpose of bringing you here. Thanks.
Oui.
And can I also just note at page 36.6.7, my friend's question, because he conflates one answer and then the reference to the report. When you read the transcript, it gives a wholly misleading impression.
Right. Mr. Gessier, see if you can identify the concern raised, if you can correct it too. If not,
I mean, I can deal with it in cross-examination, but sometimes it's better to highlight it now. Thank you.
I can understand Mr. Hooper's concern, and it wasn't a question of conflating both. It's just that the question followed Mr. Mopu's answer, but I think it's something that Mr. Hooper can deal with in cross. In light of the time, Your Honor, I'd like to we could take the morning break at this point, and I'll start on a new subject when we do come back.
And you're still on track in terms of your time estimate of completing by the end of today?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. All right, we will now take our morning break, witness. We will let you off for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to 30. Court will rise.